And we are back, and I'm excited about this interview because I think this woman probably thinks I stalked her a little bit. I'm really I stalked her. I stalk people into my friendships when I find cool people online. I'm gonna go deep, but I want to say just welcome, Kathryn. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing amazing. It's wonderful to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me.
It's so good to have you. And again, I did kind of stalk you. I'll tell more of that story a little bit later. But those of you who are just listening, you want to come to the video because you're wearing that's such a pretty orange.
Thank
Like,
you.
yeah, with your glasses and then the background. I'm like, she's all coordinated. You
Yeah,
almost
well, I'm at my sister's house, so this is her fabulous background. So shout out to Dr. Tiffany Johnson and the MD doctor for having a fabulous home for me
oh
to
my
sit in
God.
for this recording.
I would say, I was like, that's so pretty. You're like matching. Anyway, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. I'm excited to do this interview. I've asked Kathryn to come in. I'm going to read something in just a moment that I want you to sit back and listen to. But I asked you to come in because I don't even know, Kathryn. I'm gonna be honest. I have no idea when I saw your profile. I want to say it was in the Exodus Summit group on Facebook. And I think you were just maybe leaving being a professor and starting and really getting your academy going. And you mentioned some things you were doing. And I was like, ooh, that sounds interesting. And then I just went down the rabbit hole because, it's like, oh, that's interesting. She's interesting, super interesting. And then I don't even know what happened. I think IG, I started following. We just kind of casually started talking on IG.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's thank you for obliging my like random.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's been wonderful to meet you and get to know you. Yeah, we were able to actually connect in person. So that was all good.
Yes, and Kathryn is in the city that I hope to do some part-time living in. Whew, try to get this last child out of high school. We close. We're so close. We got one more semester. But you're in Savannah. I'm sure we're going to talk more about that in a moment. But before we get into that and I ask my questions, I'm going to read something to you. So I want you to just sit back, relax, take this all in,
Mhm.
and then we'll start our conversation. So Dr. Kathryn Sophia Belle is the founder and owner of La Belle V. Or I want to say, is it La Belle V
Mhm.
Academy or Vi? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Make sure I'm saying it right. V Academy, offering individual coaching, small group coaching, workshops, and retreats, both in person and virtually. She's a former associate professor of philosophy and affiliate faculty in African American studies, as well as women's gender and sexuality studies at the Pennsylvania State University. Her primary research and teaching interests lie in African American. I'm saying that wrong. African American philosophy, Black feminist philosophy, and as a coach, scholar, speaker, certified yoga. Yeah, y'all, I'm still going. Instructor and unhappily married. And I love this. I want you guys to know that is in quotes. Unhappily unmarried mother of 4 children. She understands the myriad demands of work and home, as well as the desire for a balanced and integrated life. She's an active listener, co inquirer, gentle agitator, and accountability partner in her client's self realization and self actualization journey. She describes her coaching method as embodied, I always mess up this word, existentialism.
Existentialism.
Yes, existentialism. Y'all know this is going to be deep. I can't even read what I wrote. Because she takes seriously the mind body connection, physical and metaphysical inquiry, the power of self awareness, as well as the insights gained when we take time to contemplate life's bigger and deeper questions. Girl, all right, I got it all out.
Yes. Yes.
How did that feel hearing me? I know I messed up on a few words, but how did that feel overall hearing me read that to you?
It feels good. Like I'm glad that is who I am and what I do, and I'm glad that that is the kind of representation of me that exists out there. It means that I've been kind of communicating my true authentic self in the world, and it's being received as such. So I
Mm,
appreciated that. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So it's funny. So Kathryn, we've met and we had lunch. I'm heavy into astrology. Okay. So I talk about astrology in this
Hmm.
space. I see on IG, I can tell you've got some astrology spaces.
Oh
And
yes.
I was like, I got to ask this woman. I have to ask her if she knows her top three. Do you know your top
Yes.
three? Okay.
Yes.
I almost want to guess, but I'm not going to. I'm like, Gemini has got to be up in here, but tell me, what are your top three?
So Cancer Sun, Gemini Moon, Leo Rising.
I knew it. I knew it.
Yeah,
She's got to have Gemini because your writing and your communication is so strong. And that's something that Gemini and social. Gemini is also a very social energy. And I knew you were a Cancer because of your birthday, and I remember when you posted your birthday, and I'm like, yeah, she has that, but she's got something else that's doing. So
definitely.
so share with our audience. We're going to talk about 40 plus,
Mhm.
but before 40, we want to get
Mhm.
to kind of know the journey of Kathryn. And I usually start in the 20s. Who do you remember Kathryn being in her 20s, personally or professionally? And
Wow. So for me, I've always been so like with what La Belle Academy, I have signature programs for high achievers, happily unmarried, and erotic empowerment. And so for me, the high achiever part, I can remember starting probably as early as 12. Like I remember when I was
mm,
12 years old, my mother and I were walking. We ran into a friend of hers that my mother had gone to high school with. And so she says, "Oh, this is so and so. She finished high school in 3 years." And I immediately latched onto that, like, "Oh, you can do high school in 3 years instead of 4 years." So by the time I went to high school, I was like, "Oh, I'm doing this in 3 years." So I finished high school in 3 years at the age of 16. So by the time I was
wow.
20 years old, I was a freshman in college at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. So my 20s for me were very much about education because I was at Spelman, where I started
Mm,
out as a biology pre-med and pre-law major because I wanted to
mm.
do a JD/MD when I finished and practice law dealing with medical research ethics, right? Like this was my plan going into college. And then I realized my freshman year, I went to Spelman in Atlanta. It's a small liberal arts college for women,
Mhm,
historically Black college. And
mhm.
I would be like dragging myself to the biology labs, but I'd be like skipping along to my humanities classes. So I was like, okay, like maybe the biology thing is not the thing. So I went because Spelman's such a small school. I went to each
Yeah.
department and said, okay, I want to do this JD/MD when I finish. How can your major best help me with doing the
Mm,
JD/MD? And so, of
mhm,
course, the philosophy department had the strongest argument for how philosophy could help me, well, both with medical school and with law school. So I changed my
mm.
major from biology pre-med to philosophy. And then I realized I really did enjoy philosophy. By the time I got to my senior year, I was thinking, well, I'll probably do philosophy eventually, but I probably need to do something else before then. So I was still thinking about maybe law school. I was thinking about international studies. And then I found out my senior year, and this was in the late 90s, that there were only 16 Black women in the country with a PhD in philosophy.
Oh,
So I
wow.
felt a very moral and personal obligation to increase our representation in the discipline. And I really did love philosophy. So I was in college from um, like 17 to 20. Oh, so actually, I was finishing college by 20. I was in college
Mm,
from like 17 to 20. And then
mm,
I was in grad school from 20 to 24. And
mm.
so
Okay.
I went straight from college to a PhD program. I was awarded the master's along the way. So, like, once I finished my coursework in the PhD program, then I got a master's, and then I got the PhD once I finished the dissertation.
Oh my
Eh,
gosh. Okay, wait. So you had your PhD by the time you were 25, 24,
By
somewhere in there?
24, yeah, I got it. I defended my dissertation like
Wow.
in June, and then I turned 25 like in July, I think.
Oh
So it
my
was like
gosh.
2003. So I was in grad school, like, so college was like 95 to 99, grad school was like 99 to 2003. So
Wow.
yeah, that was all in my 20s. And then I also got married when I was in grad school between my first and second semesters. And then I had my older two kids when I was in grad school. So like I remember defending my comprehensive exams pregnant with my son and defending my dissertation proposal pregnant with my daughter. So I had two kids when I was writing the dissertation and defended the
Oh my
dissertation.
gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And,
Okay.
and that
All
was
right.
all like really the early 20s, right?
I
Like
was
that
about
was
to
like
say, girl, we ain't even hit 28.
we
Okay.
didn't even get to like 25 to 30. Yeah.
So let's stay there for a minute because you
Hmm.
mentioned about and I know your story based on just our conversations, and then obviously I said I stalked you, so I did hear a bit of kind of the trajectory or the tenure really going through
Hmm.
undergrad to grad school and so forth. What, if you can recall,
Hmm.
what were you feeling at
Mhm,
that time? Like,
mhm,
what was it like you like had shut off feelings and like, no, I just gotta get this done? Or was it
mhm.
like, no, girl, I was feeling, yeah.
So in my 20s, I was excited. Like I felt like, and I still feel this way, right? Like my gifts will make room for me. All things work together for my good. So I knew like, and I was always very goal oriented, right? So I knew once I had the vision for the thing and had the plan for the thing, I could work the plan for the thing, right? So I'd experienced
Mm.
that with finishing high school early. I'd experienced that with going to Spelman and changing majors. I experienced that with like getting admitted right into a PhD program and going through the PhD program. And I think
Mm.
part of it was also family stuff. Like my mother went back to school after having me, like she went and got a master's after I was born. And then she went to law school after having my sister and I, and also taking care of several of her nieces and nephews. And we had
Oh,
like aunts in the
wow.
house, and like my great
Oh,
grandmother was
wow.
in the house.
Okay.
So at one point, like when she was in law school, there were like 6 adults and 4 kids in the house. And so I think in my mind, it didn't occur to me like I can't get through grad school with 2
Yeah.
kids because I'd seen my mother do law school with 6 kids, right? Now, something I
Yeah.
hadn't factored in was that there were also 4 adults to balance out the 6 kids, right? As opposed to 2 adults, one of whom was doing most of the work, which was me, right? So like I hadn't done
Ah.
that part of the calculus, but I do appreciate that I had a model of like, you don't have to choose between one thing and the other, even if I hadn't done the right calculus for how much work that was actually gonna be.
Yes. Okay, so there we go. Cause yeah, I mean, I
Mhm.
think, and this is why when I'm coaching people and I tell, especially people who have children, I'm like constantly saying, remember, your children are watching way more and feeling way more than
Yes.
hearing you talk about. I mean, they might
Yeah.
hear bits and pieces, but like you said, it was normalized to
Mhm.
see a woman be a mother and do all these other badass things. And it
Mhm.
wasn't, foreign. So why not? Like,
Mhm.
it made sense. But to your point, so let's switch gears then. Because you
Mhm.
said, but they had 4 adults.
Right, right, and it's very different, it's very different. I mean, I think, like, it worked for me because it didn't occur to me that it wouldn't work, right? Like, it not
Mhm.
working was just not an option. I do remember I mean, I was exhausted a lot of the time, right? Like, I can look at pictures of myself with like, there's one picture in particular I can think of with, like, I have both kids in my lap, I have, like, bags under my eyes.
Oh my
So it's
gosh.
like, it was exhausting, but it went quickly though, actually, right? It did go
Yeah.
pretty like 4 years goes by quickly. So,
In hindsight, I think
yeah.
children, like, because I look at my boys now, I'm like, it cannot be that you're adults. Like, this
Mhm.
can't be possible. So,
Mhm.
well, in terms of starting a family, and
Mhm.
I kind of want to go there because I know a lot of Black women,
Mhm.
particularly. I mean, I know as a Black woman, and then just, the community of Black women that I'm connected to,
Mhm.
this idea of overachievement. And, we're part of Exodus Summit. I've had Stephanie Perry here on the podcast and really
Mhm.
just talking about how, as Black women, we can begin to move from this I can do all things all the
Mhm.
time, everything. But in the 20s,
Mhm.
was that plan where you're like, okay, I want to go to school and I want to make sure I have my family and I want to make sure I have, or was it kind of like those things just kind of organically
I
happen?
I definitely like I knew I wanted to go post, I knew I wanted to get a degree after college, right? So again, initially that was a JD MD and then I ended up switching to a PhD. So I knew I wanted to continue at school. I love reading, I love educate. Like one of the things I loved about grad school was like I had my tuition was covered and I got an assistantship and it felt like, oh my goodness, I'm
Mm.
getting paid to read and write. Like this is the best thing ever, right? So I
Yeah.
really loved, graduate school for me. A lot of people have really difficult, challenging, like trial
Yeah.
and tribulation kinds of experiences in grad school. And that wasn't my experience. I mean, it was a predominantly white institution. There's racism that goes along with that. So I don't want to diminish or deny that. But I
Mhm.
really did love the idea of like, oh my goodness, I get paid to read every day, right? Like I could sit in coffee shops with philosophy books and write about what I think about the philosophy books, right? Like so I really enjoyed graduate school in that regard. So I knew I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wanted to have 4 kids. Like I decided that when I was in college,
Mm.
I was like, I want to have 4 kids. I want 2 boys and 2 girls. I want the boys older than
Mm.
the girls. So I literally manifested like the birth order and everything of the kids that I wanted.
Oh my gosh.
But I was like, I had no, like, again, I didn't know what I was actually asking for or getting into, right? Like, it's like I knew I had this idea of this thing and I treated it like every other thing I do, right? Like, this is the plan. This is what I want. This is how I'll go about manifesting that thing that I want.
Mm.
So I didn't necessarily plan like exactly when I had the kid, like, because there's like 6 years. So I had 4 altogether. I had 2 in grad school and I had 2 more when I was still pre tenure when I first got to
Okay.
Penn State.
Mhm.
So there's like 6 years between them, and I had a miscarriage between the 2
Mm.
middle kids as well.
Okay.
So I did know that I wanted a family. I wanted a family of the size that I had it. That wasn't like an accident. That wasn't something that was imposed on me from the outside. If anything, I pushed for that harder than
Mm.
the person that I was married to. So
Mm.
I did know I wanted those things, but I didn't know. Like now, having done it, I'm like, oh, that was a lot, and it and it is a lot, right?
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
so now I would say like even looking at, I think there is a pressure. I know there's this social pressure and expectation on like women in general and Black women in particular to do all the things, to be all the things. And my thing is like, you can do and be all the things that you want to do and be, but it's important to figure out like what that is for yourself instead of it being determined from the outside, right? And so it's
Absolutely.
like, if you want to have a family, then have a family. But if you're like feeling lukewarm about it, or you just feel like there's somebody else who's like, you ought to have kids, like don't have kids, right? Like I could
Mhm.
see a parallel life for myself in which I never got married and never had kids and would be as fulfilled and as happy, right? And so a lot of times I think we attribute our happiness or our purpose or our joy outside of ourselves, whether it's to a partner or to children, and like they don't make you who you are, right? Like
Mm-mm.
you, and then at the end of the day, like we have children to raise them for them to go out into the world, right? Like they are not with you forever, even if you're in relationship with them forever, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so this idea of like, this is my most important job, or this is my only sense of purpose is in motherhood, like I think we need to disrupt that narrative.
Oof.
Yeah.
Right there, we need to disrupt that narrative. And I think this is the whole reason why I created Finding Your Voice after
Mm-hmm.
40, because this idea that we hit 40s and oh boy, things are just kind of gonna go downward. I
No,
say this
I
all
love
the
40s.
yes.
I'm excited about 50 too, in the 50s.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still, I'm 51. I'm like, all right, 50, what we got? I will say I really enjoyed my 40s. I love
Mm-hmm.
that. That's been my best decade by far.
Mm-hmm.
50s have been, you know what, 50s, I just think your health, your wellness, your body, your physicality, your
Mm-hmm.
mortality, like that
Mm-hmm.
all. And not to say that 50 is suggestive of death, but you
Mm-hmm.
do start seeing people like
Yeah.
you're
You have to take,
watching.
you have to be really intentional about your health. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
I
very
mean,
much
throughout,
more.
but certainly, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
as you go
yeah.
on.
And I think it's a weird wake up call, because I know for me and so many of my friends and people in the same age bracket as me, your mind is still, yeah, I'm 28. Like, I mean, your mind, so
Right.
to
Your mental age and your physical
yes,
age are
right.
different.
And I mean, you're like a wise though, 28, because life,
Mm-hmm.
life is doing a lot of things. But your body, you're like, wow, wait a minute, no. And it's not like it's falling apart, but it
Mm-hmm.
is different. So I tell people, 50s is more, it's like we're not playing with you on a
Mm-hmm.
lot of, and on a lot of levels. So I
Yeah.
think, I love hearing you say that. And speaking about finding your voice, so it sounds like you found your voice in middle school. I'm like, okay, Kathryn,
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's like an ebb and flow to it, right? Like there are times when I was very clear about like my voice and what I wanted and who I was, and then there were times when, like, I think that was like there was a period in graduate school where maybe toward the end of graduate school, even though I was doing all the things, I would say between like finishing graduate school and starting my first tenure track job, there was a period, and I don't know if it was like, okay, I did this thing, so what's next? I'm not sure what
Mm,
what contributed to that, or it might have just been like, oh, I've made these series of decisions that I'm questioning now that was coming up. But there was
mhm.
definitely a time where I felt like I was like probably around going into 30, where I was
Okay.
like, okay, I feel like I've kind of lost my voice and my sense of self. And how do I like be intentional
Mm,
about reclaiming that? So there was definitely a period of time where I did feel like I lost that sense of connection to my voice. And I think part of, or I know now, like in hindsight, part of that was not listening to my intuition, right? And so
mm,
like it's like whenever I listen to my intuition, as outlandish as it may seem, it always works out great. But when
yeah.
I override my intuition, it's like there are consequences for that. And so I think I was probably dealing with some of the like, oh, I didn't trust my intuition here, and I need to like go back to what my intuition is telling me, and because that's my true voice, right? And so it's like
Mm,
when I'm connected to that, and it's not about like it's learning to see with that third eye, right? Like it's not about how things look
yeah.
from the outside. Like the intuition knows things that you can't see, on this realm.
Yep,
And
yep.
so when I trust that deeper knowing, it always goes well. So
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because the concept of the third eye, and when I a lot of times when I talk to my students about, because we will have conversations, and I do a lot of mind, body, soul work, even with students. And I'm like, the third eye is super, super powerful. And so those of you listening, you're like, well, third eye, what are we talking about? That's that thing you see without seeing, without your
Hmm.
eyes. It's that
Hmm.
eye that you have without actually visually. And it is kind of fascinating if you think about the fact that if you just close your eyes, you can
Hmm.
see anything you think about,
Mhm.
literally, like you can
Mhm.
visualize it. And so it's a very powerful thing. And I think going to trust the intuition. So I want to
Mhm.
kind of go there before we start getting into the 40s.
Yeah.
Was there something that happened that made you start like trusting? Like, how did you learn? Because I find that this is the hard part, is that
Mhm.
people will have the intuition, they'll feel it, they don't trust it.
Mhm. Mhm.
How have you learned how to trust what it is you feel?
I think when I started paying attention, like I think I was probably doing it without knowing I was doing it for a long time,
Mm,
right? Or
mhm,
it was probably framed more because I was like raised in a church. My mother was a minister. So it was probably
mm,
at that time for me framed more in terms of like, Holy Spirit
mhm,
guidance or,
mhm.
or having faith and trust in something greater than myself to achieve whatever, or prayer, however you want to frame it. So I think that was a large part of how I framed it in the terminology that I used probably through college.
Mm,
But I
mhm.
think like when I started paying attention, well, you know what? I think it was, or I know it was like I knew intuitively when I didn't want to be married anymore, right?
Mm,
And like so
okay.
trusting that intuition. So then I had like these concrete, tangible times when like my intuition told me something really strongly and I like went through with it. And the other side of it was amazing and spectacular and fabulous. But then also when I reflected on like, okay, well, what was going wrong here? Or what was, and it was like, oh, there were things that were off, but I was like hitting the override button because it like from the
Yeah.
outside, it looked like it was fine. And like, well, what are you, what's wrong or whatever. But it was like, but like intuitively deeper down, I knew something was going on. So
Yeah.
when I kind of started reflecting more on that, I could look back at like these core times in my life where my intuition told me something really strongly that from the outside might not have made any sense, but when I trusted it, like it ended up working out spectacularly. And that goes from, from where I decided to go to school to my graduate school experience to, the tenure track jobs that I got to the tenure track jobs that I left, right? Like all of that
Mhm,
was guided
mhm.
by intuition and spirit.
Mm, I love it. Ah, this is good. This is good, Catherine.
Yeah.
You're saying some really good stuff because
Mhm.
I know that many women listening to this, and I don't, whether you're in your 40s, 50s, 30s, 20s, whatever, I do think that as women in general, because just the way that a lot of our wiring is that, that intuition is constantly, it's so much of the fabric. It's that I think of males as well, but it's
Mhm.
for women, there's a lot to navigate, but that trusting it, that's what
Mhm.
I find so many like having a hard time. So the way you just kind of explained this override
Mhm.
thing that we
Yeah, it's like
do.
you know something, and then you're like, but but he said this, or it looks like that, and then you go with what somebody else said, or what it looks like, as opposed to what you really feel deep inside.
Yeah.
And it's spiritual, it's physical and metaphysical, right? And this is where like that embodied existentialism comes in, because I think it's important to trust our bodies and how our bodies tell
Mhm.
us things, right? And so again, for me, like I'm a philosopher. I've been an academic. I just left. I say their academy after 20 years of being in their academy.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm very cerebral. I'm in my head a lot, right? Like so, I've often operated from the neck up. And so I've had
Mm.
to be really intentional about like getting into my body and embodied experiences. And so a lot of times I think we don't pay attention to, like for me, for example, if I'm like, I rarely think in my head I'm stressed, right? Or I feel overwhelmed.
Mhm.
But my
Mhm.
body, when I feel tension in my neck and my shoulders, if I feel tension in my lower back, that's like my body saying like, okay, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, you need to
Mhm.
slow down, you need to like calm down and chill, right? But it's like I had to pay attention to the messages that my body were giving me, or even like the excitement and joy that you get when you really want to do something. And that feeling of like, I feel like I should be excited about this, but I'm not. Like that's something to pay attention
Yeah.
to as well, right? Or that feeling, that sinking feeling in your stomach, like something feels off here, even though it looks from the outside okay, but something just feels off. Like that's also intuitive, and sometimes that's an embodied feeling of like, sickness in your stomach, or like the butterflies in your
Mhm.
stomach, whatever the case may be. So I think it's like it is this spiritual, metaphysical thing, but it is also a physical, embodied thing. And I think we're just so socialized and taught not to pay attention to and honor the
Absolutely.
messages of our bodies. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny, you said that you're a Leo rising. So that means that you're Cancer, which is your sun sign, which
Hmm.
Cancer is all about, like Cancer is, it's about the nurturing, it's about the
Hmm.
taking care of. But it's interesting hearing you talk because Cancer for you is in the 12th house, and the
Hmm.
12th house is the hidden part of self.
Hmm.
So it's not
Hmm.
readily, like when you said you're in your head, the
Hmm.
Gemini is very much, our moon signs play really heavy because that's our
Hmm.
day to day, how we get our emotional needs met is really from our moon. But
Hmm.
that Cancer being in the 12th house, I hearing you say I have to like wait a minute, with the body and really the embodiment,
Mm-hmm.
because and that would make complete sense
Mm-hmm.
because of
Mm-hmm.
it being a more hidden subconscious part
Mm-hmm.
of yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
see, guys, y'all know I'm gonna throw astrology
It
in there
all
because
comes in. Well, and that's where the yoga came in for me as well, because that was an
yeah,
experience that I could have that I was like, oh, I can really be in my body in this
yes,
experience, right? And so yoga gave me the tools to teach me how to like really connect to my body and be present with my body, both on the mat and off the mat. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. All right, so let's get to 40s. Okay, so finding your voice after 40s. Was the divorce in your 40s or was that in your
No, it was
30s?
in my 30s. Let me tell
Okay.
you, this is that intuitive, and this is also like the space time continuum breaking down, right? Like time is not linear. I
Yeah.
literally felt like my 40-year-old self came to me in my 30s, like around
Mm.
36, and was like, girl, 40 is about to be amazing. But you know what's not making it to 40? That marriage. That's what's not making it to 40, right?
Mm.
And I felt the same also even with leaving the academy. Like it was like my 50-year-old self was like, 50 is about to be outstanding, but you know what's not coming into 50s? That academic
Wow.
job. And
Yeah.
so I felt like my future self kind of came to my present self to say, like, this is what's coming. So what do you need to do to prepare for this thing that is coming?
Oh.
So yeah, I very much felt like my 40-year-old self came to me in my mid 30s, like around 36 is when I was like, yeah, this is not the thing. This is not going to be a thing. And I remember like I was training for, speaking of body, like I was training at the time, I was training for like a half marathon.
Okay.
And so I was listening to this audiobook, The Seed of the Soul by Zukoff, which I'm sure I'd heard about on
Mm-hmm.
like Oprah or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this section in the text where he talks about split intentions. And so he's like, you know, if your intentions are split, and he gives the example of marriage, like if you're married, but you have split intentions about whether or not you want to stay married, like that marriage is going to end. And like I literally like stopped in my tracks because it was like
Oh.
naming the split intention that I'd had about that relationship that I'd never acknowledged or said out loud. And so it was like in that moment, I knew like, oh, this marriage is gonna like, I don't
Mm.
know when, or, you know, it wasn't at that point, it
Mm-hmm.
was not like I'm gonna go file for a divorce now, but it
Right.
was like a multi-year period. Like that was like, I think 2014. And I
Okay.
ended up not actually filing for divorce until like maybe 2017, I think, like 3 years
Okay.
later.
Okay.
So it was definitely like a gradual process of like first me intuiting it. And again, that kind of 40-year-old self being like, girl, that's not coming with us. Um, and
Was
then
that
getting,
scary, Catherine? Like when you were the girl
it
that's not coming, were you like,
it wasn't, it was like good looking out. You know what I mean? It was
yeah,
good looking out.
yeah,
So I think it was like, there, so the fear was not so much around like, that voice or that intuition. It was more, it was again those social things that came up of like, what are people
right,
going to think? The whole narrative around Black women being matriarchs and emasculating and all of this kind of stuff. Or, you know, the idea of a broken family, like, am I going to ruin my
yeah,
kids? But, you know, like we have 4 kids together, right? Like we've been
yeah,
married for 17 years. And so for me, a lot of the fear that came up was like me feeling a tremendous amount of guilt for feeling like I was ruining my kids' lives by getting a
mm,
divorce, but then also realizing I was not, I was not modeling the kind of relationships and love that I would want them to have for themselves if I was staying in a
right,
relationship that was not working for me and healthy
absolutely.
for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say, thank you for saying that because when I was same here, mine happened more in my well, I was having listen, myself told me very early, like, what are you doing? What are you
Right.
doing? But
Really
I
before the marriage
yes,
even, right?
me,
Like
yes.
yeah. So that's when the first override happened. It was like, you know, but again, it's like the church thing. It was like, okay, well, you
Mm,
know, this is like, I want kids. This is the only legitimate way to like have a family and
yeah.
build. It has to be like this nuclear family thing, which I have since rejected. But anyway, go ahead, share your
No,
experience.
no, no, it's fine. So yeah, that I mean, but hearing that, I knew I was clear very early, but everything you just said, the social and then
Hmm.
the kids, I mean, that just became a whole. And I would
Hmm.
I would write in my journal like I've created my own Frankenstein. Like
Mm,
this life that I've created is, and I love my children and I wanted to have kids and that was all very intentional. But I didn't like the way my life was moving in having the
hmm.
kids. And I didn't like the way that I fell into marriage. Like I
Hmm.
didn't feel like I got the opportunity to choose it.
Mm,
It like it
hmm.
felt like it chose me in
Hmm.
some kind of weird way. And I said, okay,
I
and went with
guess.
it. Yes, I guess this is good,
Hmm.
and
Well, we're
so
told that it's good and it's what you should want, right? And so
yes.
even if you
Yes.
don't want it, then you feel like, well, I'm supposed to want this, and so you go for it anyway. Or you really think you do want it, and then you get it, and you're like, oh, this is not like the
Yes.
experience is not the brochure, you know.
She's
So, and
always
then I
saying,
think we become complicit in the lie of it, right? Because then people pretend to be happy in it and they're miserable, right? And like it's the
yes.
holiday season, you're probably seeing all kinds of posts with everybody in their matching pajamas and everything. And like they was cussing each other out right before they took that picture. And they got an
Yes.
attitude and like all went to separate rooms after the picture.
Or,
But we
or are
focus,
in separate rooms, like literally. Like, yes, I mean,
yeah,
that's how we are, but we come
yeah.
together for the picture. Yeah.
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 So, and so, not to say I don't think that's necessarily all fake, but I think we buy into like again the brochure version of things that don't actually align with like how people are, moving in their day-to-day life. And then I think a lot of times women, again, in general, Black women in particular, will internalize like this, like how have I failed to make it look like the brochure, as
Mm,
opposed to how did the
mm.
brochure falsely advertise what this experience
Come on
is.
now. Come on.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, ladies. Listen, we have to do a whole nother episode, Kathryn, because it's funny. My partner and I, we've been talking a lot. And by the time this airs, this episode is so funny. I batch record early, and I don't believe this is going to be slated to air until spring. But I know it's early. But I will say this. My partner and I, we talk so much about relationships, and we both were married. So, and for 20 years, he was married 20 years, I was married 20 years. His wife just passed away, so it was a different type of
Mm-hmm.
loss
Mm-hmm.
and decision making. But still, marriage is marriage, and so we talk a lot about this. And I just what you just said about the brochure. Oh my God. That's such a good way to explain it. And that's not to downplay marriage, because I do think that marriage has amazing qualities of healing, of self development, growth. That's what relationships really ultimately are for. But more times than not, I think people are staying in spaces because of the brochure,
Mm-hmm.
and they want that brochure. They believe in that brochure, and they're going to make that brochure happen no matter what, even though the rest, the fire is blazing all around. So I,
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate you saying that. So, all right. So let's, girl done hit 30 minutes on my clock. I'm like, how is that possible? I have a few more questions though
Mm-hmm.
before we go to our bonus. And if you guys are enjoying this, remember, if you go to patreon.com/finding your voice, you can see Kathryn as well as hear more when we go into our bonus round. But you talked about yoga. I watch you. We've talked. I'm like, Kathryn is living her best effing life. Okay. That's what it's looking like.
Yeah.
Now, I know social media is social
Right.
media.
Right.
But I would love to hear for you, what at this point in life is self-care? Like, what does that mean to
Mm-hmm.
you at this stage of life?
So for me, it's definitely I would say like what I'm most excited about at this point in my life, which I would say is also my self-care, is like really doing what I want to do, when I want to do it, with whom I want to do it, and not doing stuff I don't want to do anymore, right? Like not
Wow.
feeling obligated to do something that I actually don't want to do. And so the freedom to choose me and like what I actually want to do, and be honest and authentic in that has been super helpful for me really living my best life and not like, dragging myself to stuff, whether it's
Mm,
relationships or work related stuff or, whatever. It's just like not feeling obligated and really operating from a place of like, I can fully be present in the things that I do because I chose to do them, as opposed
yeah.
to like, throwing on a smile and pretending to want to be in a space that I don't want to be in, or being in a space with an attitude. And it's just like, well, like,
Mm,
just don't go to the space. Right. And so for me, like, whether it was leaving the institution of marriage or leaving the institution of higher education, like one of the things that really helped propel me to quit/retire being a professor was like, I really took inventory of like, what are the things about this work that I do that I really love? And for me, that was the research, it was the reading, it was the writing. What are the things
mhm,
that are exhausting or depleting? And for me, that was the meetings, it was the emails, it was the student writing letters of recommendation, it was the
mhm,
grading. And so it was just
mhm.
like, oh, I can actually remove this stuff that is exhausting and depleting and focus on the things that are energizing and life giving. And so just that choice, the magic of that choice and that agency of like, oh, I can choose to do the things I want and I can choose not to do this other stuff that's not working for me. That has been a tremendous kind of principle for me for taking care of myself.
Mm, super empowering, Kathryn. Like, I'm sure you hear this a lot. I mean, because you've made some really bold moves in your life. Like just hearing, and I know everybody's just getting a snapshot from this interview, but I hope you guys are catching on that she's
Mhm.
no longer a part of, she's not a professor anymore at
Mhm.
Pennsylvania. She's no longer married.
Mhm.
These are all things that people are like work a lifetime to, especially
Mhm.
that tenured,
Yeah.
faculty, what have you, or even establishing marriage, 17 years, 4 kids.
Mhm.
And we didn't get a chance to say this, but you're also right now having the opportunity to be your children are older, half your
Mhm.
children are adults, but others
Mhm.
are still younger, but they're living with their father. So
Mhm.
you're like a single woman,
Yeah,
like
I've had
here.
6 months of just, like, really being able to take a true sabbatical, like a true Sabbath and rest where I can just, like,
Mm,
just rest and reset. It's been a wonderful time to rest and reset where I can, like, sleep as much as I want, I can rest as much as I want, and I've been able to find a good balance between, like, traveling and going places and doing things and just, like, being at home and enjoying, like, solitude. Like, I really enjoy my solitude. Like, I really love my own company. So I love the quiet of the
yeah,
house when it's empty. I love when I'm around my children, I love being able to spend quality time with my children. And when I'm
right.
not around my children or lovers or friends, I really enjoy spending quality time with myself. And so this last 6 months has been a great opportunity to balance between like visiting with my kids or having my kids visit with me and really just having that solitude and that quality quiet time.
Mm. Girl, yes, I mean, I think that's beautiful because you've really, I mean, you've taken, like I said, this is a bold move because society does not tell us. There's no conditioning anywhere
Hmm.
that gives these permission slips to say, "Oh yeah, girl, just let go of all of that, follow your
Listen,
intuition."
I'm happy to hand out all the permission slips for leaving relationships that don't serve you, whether they're marriages or not, for leaving jobs that don't serve you, whether they're tenured or not. And I think a lot, like, I think there is there's this sunken cost bias. You mentioned like 17 years in, 20 years in, you're like, well, I've put this many years into this, so I need to like stick it out. And it's just like that thing will take you out, right? Like if it's no longer serving you, you
Okay.
have gratitude for the experience of those 17 or 20 or however many years, and then move on to other opportunities that are presenting themselves, or move on to like your joy and happiness that was not happening in this relationship space. And the same with job. Like, yeah, I'm a Black woman philosopher doing like continental philosophy, which is like the margin of philosophy in the United States. Is
Mm,
mostly analytic, although I'm trained in both. And then
mhm,
even within that, doing like African American, Africana, Black feminism, right? And so if I looked at like what the statistics were, I should never have been able to like one get a PhD in philosophy, let alone
mhm,
get tenure track positions in philosophy. But I've always had wonderful job opportunities. I've always been at resource rich institutions, right? So I've always been able to manifest
mm,
the best thing in whatever space that I've been in without feeling obligated to like, well, I got this and now I have to ride it out even if it no longer serves me, right? And whenever I've quit something
mm,
or left something, trusted my intuition, there's always something better on the other side of that. So that's the gift of like when you do trust your intuition and see the positive outcomes of that. Like I know whenever I trust my intuition, the other side of that's going to be amazing, right? So I've never regretted getting a divorce, right? Like that's one of the best quality. I would say my three best quality of life decisions. One was studying philosophy, so doing the philosophy
mhm,
major, getting a PhD in philosophy. Two was leaving the institution of marriage, and the third was leaving the
mm,
institution of higher education, right? Like my quality of life
mm.
shifted dramatically after trusting my intuition and following through on those
Wow.
decisions.
Wow, wow,
Yeah.
wow. Well, I'm in higher ed, and it's interesting. I have a little bit of a different space in higher ed.
Hmm.
I was a physical therapist for many years. I was a clinician, and so leaving the healthcare system was really important
Hmm.
for me because that talk about stress. And that was years ago when I left the healthcare system. So now I'm kind of in shock. I won't even go in. I mean, because the healthcare system is just a lot in this country, in America.
Yeah.
But for me, higher ed became a refuge for me, honestly. I
Hmm.
was able to still be valued as a clinician, but
Hmm.
be able to pass it along to future clinicians.
Hmm.
And so I've always really loved being in higher ed. And I
Hmm.
know higher ed can be a very tricky place as well. But my role, because I also have my master's in counseling, I've always had a bit of a unique space
Hmm.
because I could be a practitioner, do the healing work with students, teach, so it's one-on-one, but also teaching in the classroom, and
Hmm.
have been able to create these unique spaces. And so I say all of that because I want people, I think sometimes this is another thing we have to watch out nowadays is they'll be, oh, y'all don't, let's get out of work. We don't need to work. And it's like, well, wait a minute, really evaluate, are you doing meaningful work, are you
Hmm.
doing work that you feel connected to, because
Hmm.
it's less about, yes, you need to look at the environments you're in. And I know There's so much, and I love Dr. Kamani talking about toxic jobs for Black women out
Mhm.
here, and all that's a real thing. But also, if you're listening to your intuition, you're
Mhm.
listening to who you are, developing who you are, then it's okay to be, work where it feeds you, and if that
Mhm.
means in a space that is higher ed, or if it's your own space that you're facilitating, but taking the time to trust your
Mhm.
intuition, which you're making an excellent point talking about, and then following it. And to your point, I'm just like you, girl. Anytime I follow my intuition, I can't name a space where it's like, ooh, that turned out bad.
Mhm.
No,
It always works out. It
it
always
always,
works out.
always works
Well, and
out.
the thing is, it's like, again, trusting your intuition and knowing what you want, not what somebody else thinks you should want, right? Like, because again, for me, like with the
Absolutely.
like from the outside, it's like, oh my goodness, this looks like such a beautiful family, but it was just like, no, this is a no for me. Or even in the
Mhm.
academy, right? Like again, I was not I didn't feel like I was being grossly underpaid. I
Mhm.
always had research budgets. I always had course reductions. I could always travel where I wanted to travel. And so again, for somebody from the outside looking in, it's like, well, people are struggling or working hard to get that. Why would you walk away from me? And it's like, well, in terms of me and where I am and what my path is, like, this is no longer part of my path. Like, I did 20 years. I got my PhD in 2003. I quit slash retired in 2023. And so that was what felt right for me. So my
Right.
thing is always like, if you want to do graduate school, if you want to go into the academy, go for it. But if you feel like, oh, I need to do this in order to do that, or if you're seeking validation through the degree or through the
Yeah.
institution, the
Yeah.
degree and the institution is not going to give you that validation, right? Like, you have to have a sense of self that comes with any of those degrees or accolades or positions, right? So it's always for me, do what works for you in the space that you want to be in, but
Yes.
be intentional about that, and just pay attention to like how much of this is me and what I want, and how much of it is what other people tell me I should want.
Yeah. Do you believe my clock says 41 minutes? I can't believe that. How is that possible? How have we been talking 41 minutes? Well, we're gonna do a bonus because you coach women, you
Mhm.
coach people, and I want those. We save it for the bonus. I'm gonna ask Kathryn some questions that are a little bit more on the coaching side,
Mhm.
brief, but on the coaching side because we
Mhm.
we need to pay her for her services. But if you want to hear a little bit more, because I know this is resonating huge. I know
Mhm.
it is. I know that you've got lots of people listening to this right now saying, "Oh my gosh, okay, yes, I can." Like that
Yeah.
feeling. And so in the bonus, we'll kind of talk about maybe how to even get started if this is resonating with how you kind of take some action on this.
Mhm.
But that's the bonus. So before we go to the bonus, though, I have just two more questions
Okay.
I want to ask you. And then, well, before I even ask the questions, if people want to follow you, because you have fun stuff on IG. So, how can people follow you, or if they want to get in touch with you?
Okay.
They're not going to hear the bonus, but they want to follow up with you. What's the best way to
So
connect?
on IG and Twitter, I'm Kathryn S. Bell. So Kathryn, middle initial SBELLE. So that's Instagram and Twitter. On Facebook, I think I'm Kathryn Sophia Belle.
Okay,
And then my website is www.kathrynbell.com. I also have a Kathryn Sophia Belle website, but that's more of my academic stuff than my coaching stuff.
gotcha,
Yeah. And then my
gotcha.
email is Kathryn@kathrynbell.com. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. You guys make sure you're following, reaching out. If this is resonating, go to her website because she gives a lot more information on the services and the resources that she can offer you. So this has been so good. This has been so good. I of course I have like 20 other questions in my head, but I'm not going to do that. I
Mhm.
do have to ask this though because I ask every guest. It's just because of me being a musician and I keep carrying my music with me. What is a theme song that you have for yourself? What's a song that you
This
like
is a
live
hard one
by?
because I love so many songs. Like, my theme for 2024 is definitely love. Love is a very rich theme for me for 2024, and love in its various forms, right? Like the love
Mm,
that I have for self love, first and foremost. The love that I have for my family, lovers, the love that I have for choosing me and the work that I get to do, right? Like really being
mm,
able to focus in on, like, I love books, I love reading, I love writing.
mm.
So any song with the theme love is my theme song.
Do you have just like one example of one? Because we have a
I'm trying to
playlist,
think
and
of,
so we want
oh
to
yeah, yeah.
include
So
it.
let's go with Music Soul Child's Love. song.
Ah, okay. I love it. It's so funny. My son, I interviewed my son, my youngest son, and that was his song. And I was like, really? You
Oh
17? You listen?
wow,
I
I
know.
love it.
Yeah, he was like, that's a song that no matter what, how it doesn't matter, it doesn't age. It's just
Hmm.
right. And I'm
Hmm.
like, yeah, because I don't think you were even born when that song came out. But that's funny. I love it. I love it. All right. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you
Thank you.
so much. We're gonna continue our conversation so you can share, like I said, a little bit more of maybe a little bit of advice or helping for people who, this really resonated for.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna have you share just a little bit more about yourself in there as well. So thank you. And we'll be back, you guys, next week. So stay tuned. All right. Bonus. Okay, Kathryn. Girl, you were saying so many good things. And I'm like, ooh, which questions? As a coach, when a woman comes to you and she's in
Mhm.
this state, she realizes, all right, I need to shift. Let's do the unhappily married piece. I
Yeah.
need to shift
Happily unmarried.
or
Well, yeah.
happily,
So,
I'm sorry.
well, no, it's both, right? Like, it's how do I go from being unhappily married to being happily
Happily
unmarried? Like,
married.
that's the transformation. Yeah.
Yes. So let's say she asked this
Mhm.
question. How do you, without giving away your coaching or anything, but
Mhm.
what's generally how do you advise or ask a woman to get started? Or what does your program do to kind of help them
Yeah.
get
Well,
started?
a lot of times by the time you've come to me, you've already started. Like, you really, we seek after the people that are going to help positively reinforce the thing we know, again,
Mm,
intuitively or deep down inside, we really want, right? So if you want
mhm.
to save your marriage and stay married, you're not coming to me because I'm not team stay married. I'm
Well,
not.
suppose a woman says, Catherine, I heard you, it resonates, but I don't know, girl. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if I should stay or not.
Well, usually, like, but they do know, right? And so a lot of times it's
Mm,
just a question of like it's a matter of helping someone connect to their intuitive voice and what they really know that they're really just needing somebody. They're needing like me to hold space for them to listen to them. And I also don't rush it. I'm always like, take your time. Like, I've had people come to me and inquire and say like, I'm kind of feeling, and then like drop off the radar, and then a year later be
yeah.
like, okay, I'm ready, right? And so it's like
Yeah.
and again, like I
Yeah.
said, for me, it was like a 3-year process from that first intuitive, like this is something that needs to that's going to end to the actually taking the steps to file for divorce. So it takes time. So I don't rush anybody through that process because I think it's important for you, like when you're ready, you're ready. And
Yeah.
so I always encourage people like, let's talk through where you are now. Let's talk through what's coming up for you now. Let's think through exit strategies for what it
Okay.
looks like longer term. But I'm never like, girl, put them out your house tomorrow or go to the lawyer's office today. Like, do get that lawyer on the front end, right? Because you want to have the legal support, even if you're not ready to file yet. Get a lawyer sooner rather than later, so that you can
Yeah.
kind of get some things lined up on the legal side of things. But I don't rush anybody through that process, right? So a lot of it again is just holding space for people to talk through what they already know, but they just kind of need. And a lot of times, again, we have so many people in our ear saying like, well, stay, is that it's not that bad, but he's a nice guy. And I think even for me, like when I knew that I didn't want to be married anymore, I felt a lot of, so part of the guilt was like, oh my goodness, I'm destroying my family for my kids,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
then the other part of it was like, well, he's not abusive, he's not, and it's like it had to be some over the top terrible thing
Yes.
for me. And so I had to get to a place where it was like I had to get myself permission not to be married anymore just because I didn't want to be married
Or
anymore. Like, it didn't have
anymore.
to be about something that he did or didn't do. And
Absolutely.
so I think it's important. So once I was ready, then I could make the corresponding action. But a lot of times it's like we have to work through all of these external narratives of like, oh, but he's educated and he does this and he
Yeah.
does that. And it's just like, yeah, but if something's telling you that's off for you, just know you're not feeling that. Like, again, that permission slip of like, you can leave a situation that's not working for you, and it doesn't have to be about the other person being a terrible person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. By the time that this airs, I'm actually doing a series on getting personal with me, where I'm going to share a little bit more of my personal stuff
Mhm.
and my process and divorces. So by the time people hear this, I will have already talked about it. But everything you just said, having somebody coach you through, I had to have
Mhm.
somebody, coach me through this process so
Mhm.
that I could begin to, yes, trust what I already knew.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that's really important. I think people miss um, they miss the opportunity of coaching and
Mhm.
of therapy. Well, more so even coaching, because coaching, the beauty of coaching is, yes, you're actually going to get some tangible actions.
Mhm.
Where therapy is not really, that's not the space for that. Therapy is
Mhm.
the space for you to begin to process, better understand, connect to the feelings, to behavior, so forth. But coaching is going to actually give you some strategies.
Mhm.
So I think that what you're saying is super important, that nobody's coming to you who doesn't already kind of know
Yeah, they
that this
already
is
know.
it.
And the thing is, like, you need, I'm team, I'm poly in many areas of my life, right? Like, so I'm like, you need a whole team, right? So like for me, right, like part of my team is like I have a therapist, like I have, I've had therapists, I've had coaches, I've had energy workers, I've had like, chiropractors, massage therapists, right? Like it's like, how do I take care of my body? How do I take care of my mind and get like all the support that I need through
Yes.
whatever's going on in my life, right? Like, so I think so it's not like either or, right? Like you can have a coach and have a therapist, and your process,
Yes.
for me, they positively reinforce. Like I love clients who also have therapists because they can do the
Yes.
counseling thing with the therapist and then do the
Yes.
coaching thing with me, but
Yeah.
they positively reinforce each other. So
Yes.
I would do both, and also again like the legal part of it, especially if you're talking about like divorcing, because you have like assets, you have if you have dependents,
Absolutely.
right? There's a lot of stuff in there. So think about
Absolutely.
like I approach when I'm coaching for like the high achievers as well. I talk about this, like when you're thinking about mentors, I often emphasize doing a multi-mentor rather than a mono mentor.
Yeah.
A
Hmm.
mono mentor model, right? Like, so one person can't be your everything as a mentor, right? So sit down and think about like, what are the different needs that I have in terms of mentoring in whatever profession you may be in? And then who is best suited to meet those different needs, right? Like, so for me as a professor, I was really the like work-life balance,
Hmm.
mentor, right? Like, so if you
Hmm.
needed somebody to ask, are you getting your sleep? Are you moving your body? Are you eating? Like that was me. I wasn't necessarily the professor that wanted to read 15 drafts of your paper, right? But there were other people who
Right.
could do that really well.
Right.
So it was easier for me. I mean, I would read papers because that was part of my job, but like that wasn't my
Mhm.
go-to. That wasn't the go-to thing that a lot of mentees had for me. So it's like
Right.
figuring out who is best suited to meet those different needs, whether personal friends or in a professional capacity, and getting those needs met. And then I'm the same with lovers, right? It's just like, okay, these are my various needs that I have in terms of my
Yeah.
romantic partnerships, and who can best meet those needs, because one person can't meet all of, it's a lot of pressure on you
Yeah.
and on them to have that one person meet all of those needs. But also
Yeah.
for me, it's playing to people's strengths, right? Like, so if this person, whatever, let's say you like to go to the opera and this person likes to go to football games. So it's like, I don't like to go to football games, so I don't want to go to the football game with you. But if you have somebody that wants to go to the football game with you, y'all have fun, right? Or the person who doesn't want to go to the opera, I'm like, I'm not dragging you to I mean, I don't actually love the opera, but like say theater, it's like I love live theater, I love Broadway plays. So it's like I don't want to be going to a Broadway play with somebody who does not actually want to be there. I want somebody who's going to enthusiastically consent and engage in whatever,
Yeah.
sexual and social activities. And so for me, the freedom of having multiple lovers is that like each person can play, like I'm not making demands on them that they don't want to meet, right? Like I'm playing to their
Right.
strengths, and then they can feel like fully empowered in exercising those strengths with me. So yeah, same with like with
Absolutely.
mentoring with lovers, but then also with support systems, your support team in terms of coaches, therapists, and things like
Absolutely. Well, it's so funny hearing you say this, because now I know you're a Gemini moon.
that.
And I'm like, so Gemini is balanced with multiplicity. That's a
Yeah.
very important aspect so whenever I have someone who has Gemini in their top three, I'm like, you doing multiple things, multiplicity in your life,
Hmm.
simultaneous activity is what's going to feel grounding for you.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
you are singular in one thing, that's gonna, after a while, I mean, you can do it,
Hmm.
but it's so hearing you say that, it's like, yeah, but I agree. I particularly with support. That's when I'm coaching people, it's the first thing. I'm like, do you have a therapist
Hmm.
too?
Hmm.
And if you don't, get curious about potentially
Yeah.
having that, because you can have them both. And to your point, if you can also be doing some, body work and having a spiritualist or having these different spaces, that,
Hmm.
that's it's teamwork makes the dream work. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. All right, I'm going to let you have a life. So I'm going to ask you one last question,
Hmm.
because she is in California as we're taping
Yes,
this.
I'm
So I
at
want
my
to make sure that
sister's house.
yes, have time with your family. Is there anything that I didn't ask you, wish I would have asked, or is there something you just want to make sure people hear from you about?
Hmm.
Any last
Hmm.
thoughts? Any last thoughts?
I mean, well, I would say for people who do want to work with me, like go to the website and you can see more about my signature programs for high achievers, happily unmarried, and erotic empowerment. And I've also been working on some stuff on exit strategies, just because I
Ooh.
realized like, oh, this is actually a strength for me,
Yeah, you've
exiting,
exited really
yeah,
well in a lot.
gracefully and like and doing like what you want to do on the other side of it. So I would say that, but I would also say like I think we've already talked about it. I mean, it really is the intuition is the major thing, right? Really learning to like pay attention to and trust and follow your intuition, I think is the major takeaway that I would want people to have. And just know the other side of that is always glorious. And even for a planner, like again, I'm a high achiever, I'm a planner. I'm always like, okay, we're gonna do A and then B and then C, right?
Yeah.
But then there are times when I've taken these leaps and it's always worked out for me, right? So for me to switch from JDMD to like PhD in philosophy, where everybody's like, you're not gonna get a job. And I've never not had a job in philosophy, right?
Yes.
Or for me
Yeah.
to get tenure in philosophy and then be like, and I'm quitting, and people being like, oh my goodness, you're leaving a job for life, right? Like, which is what the perception of tenure is. And it's just like, actually, that's exactly what I'm doing, because who's trying to, like, it felt like a life
Right.
sentence for me.
Right.
But
Right.
literally, like, even in the example of me quitting my academic job, my tenured associate professor job, like when I announced on social media that I was quitting, which was like March 1st, I think, of
Mm.
2023. Within 2 weeks, I had somebody DMing me like, "Oh, I have this opportunity in Germany. I was thinking about you for this. Like, is this something that you would still be interested in applying to?" So it's like literally like, and I didn't even know that that was a thing. I just was like, I'm
Yeah.
out and I know it will be fine. And
Yes.
literally 2 weeks, the universe was like, I got you. Like 2 weeks later, this
Yes.
other opportunity presented itself. So I'll be, spending like 7 months in Germany for like January through July 2020,
That's
2024.
amazing.
So
Yes.
yeah.
I'm always telling people you can't hold a tomato and a cantaloupe in one hand. So you got to let go of one of those so that you can, hold what it
Yeah.
is you really want. And, we have to understand we've really kind of messed up. I mean, we've messed up a lot of things in society, but the conditioning of thinking that letting something go means, oh, well, my life is gone. Letting
No,
go is the universal principle of making room for the other thing to come in. Like,
absolutely.
so it's
Absolutely.
important for us to let go. We watch pruning of trees we watch the leaves leave every
Mhm,
year, and we can totally be like, yep, that's what they're supposed to do. But for
mhm,
whatever reason, we feel like we're supposed to hold on
mhm.
to everything
Yeah,
we've had through the years. And it's really not about that. It's about
yeah,
at times releasing,
yeah,
So
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
I love it. Well, this has been wonderful. We're gonna wrap up our recording. I want you to stay tight. I'm gonna end
Okay.
the video recording, but thanks everybody. Make sure you are following Kathryn, and to be all in the show notes as well, all the different areas that she's mentioned to get in contact with her. And we'll be back again next week. So stay tuned, guys.